Right, it is 12:01, so I'm going to kick us off. So, welcome to the joys and challenges of leadership in higher education. My name is Sean Devendorf. I'm the executive director of alumni engagement and annual giving here at Tufts, and I am delighted to be joining you for the second conversation in this series of virtual events. But we are navigating a time of significant global and national change. And these shifts are being felt on our campus and across our communities. So, this series was designed to connect our alumni, parents, and campus community with the inspiring ways our academic and faculty leaders are collaborating, innovating, and guiding us through these transformative times. I'd like to thank Provost and Senior Vice President Caroline Janko for taking the time to participate in this series, and Monroe France for hosting. So today's event will be a conversation between Provost Janko and Vice Provost France that will include many of your pre-submitted questions. Apologies in advance that we will not be able to get to all of them. And now I'd like to give a brief introduction of Monroe before turning it over to him, and he'll provide a short introduction to Provost Janko. So Monroe France is the inaugural Vice Provost for Institutional Inclusive Excellence at Tufts and a Professor of Practice at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Monroe serves as a member of the President's Cabinet and is charged with guiding Tufts' strategy for advancing institutional inclusive excellence. Previously, Monroe served as a Senior Associate Vice President for Global Engagement and Inclusive Leadership at New York University. Monroe has a track record of providing strategic consultation and coaching on change management, inclusive and innovative leadership, as well as organizational assessment and transformation to senior leaders and executives across the globe. Monroe is often invited to present on the future of work and talent, leadership during times of crises, and approaches to fostering effective global partnerships. Monroe is also a visiting thought leader for Wokshan University in India. And please join me in a virtual welcome to Monroe. And Monroe, thank you for taking us on this rest of this journey today.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate our partnership and, of course, the partnership with Alumni and Advancement. And with you in particular, I think we're getting really good at this rodeo show. So it's great to see you and great to have you and working with you collaboratively on this webinar. And thank you to everyone in our Alumni and Advancement who have been supportive in bringing together this idea. And so I am just very thrilled and excited to be in conversation with our provost today, Provost Caroline Janko. And I want to give a quick introduction to my direct supervisor, who actually was really responsible for bringing me here to the Tufts community. And so let me just give you a few highlights about her esteemed career and who she is as a leader. She's an internationally recognized researcher, a successful educator, and a mentor, which I know is very important to her, which we're going to talk to her more about during our conversation today. And also an effective strategic administrator with a demonstrated successful history of leadership across contexts. She is our provost and our senior vice presidents, as you heard Sean mention, but she has, and in this role, Provost Janko has redefined the ability to balance between the need of a university-wide approach to academic strategy and as well upholding and maintaining the uniqueness of our schools. Prior to her appointment as provost, Dr. Janko served as our vice provost for research here at Tufts from 2019 to 2021, and the chair of the immunology department at Tufts University School of Medicine, and then as well from 2015 to 2019. And most importantly, and lastly, I will say that she also holds the Arthur E. Spiller, MD, Endowed Professorship in Genetics at Tufts. So with great pleasure, I would like to bring to all of our screens, Dr. Provost Caroline Janko. How are you today, Caroline?
I'm fantastic. Boy, that's a lot. Thank you. Saying all that. Wow. Wow. Thank you. I'm good. I'm good. I'm thrilled to be here. This is fun. This is fun. I like talking about what I do. So this is fun. So I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm looking forward to it. So there's one other thing I would say, just building on what Sean has already shared, just as a reminder, our conversation today is about Dr. Janko, Provost, or Caroline, which I will refer to as Caroline going forward, Caroline's journey to leadership. And so most of the questions that we'll take up today are in reference to her leadership journey and how she thinks about leadership. We received many, many questions, as Sean said, and we're going to do our best to get to as many of them as possible. So before we dive into some of the other reflections around how you lead and what's at top of mind for you now at this time, Caroline, I actually want to first start about your journey. as a leader, right? And your journey as you're going into the career that you're in now. My curiosity is that, did you always know you wanted to be a professor? Did you always know that you wanted to be a researcher? Did you always know that you wanted to be a provost? Tell us a bit about your journey to getting to where you are now. So let's start there first.
So the answer is no, no, no. I never knew I wanted to do what I'm currently doing. You know, if my mom and dad had it right, I would have gotten married, had kids, and they would have been happy with it, and that was fine. But no, in all honesty, I love what I do now. I never would have imagined that I would be in this role. So let me just tell you a little bit about my journey. When people ask me about what was most influential about my journey in education, I have to say, it was really my high school years. I grew up in a small town, Buffalo, New York. My mom and dad were immigrants. None of them had gone to college. I was the first to go to college in my family. And one of the things they did, they sent me to an all-girl Catholic high school, which I have to tell you, I credit as being critical to my drive, to my ability just to try anything and not to be afraid of trying things. I didn't have a journey, a particular journey that I wanted to go on, but I have to credit some close family friends who encouraged me to go to college. You know, after high school, really encouraged me to go to college and encouraged me to actually go beyond a 4-year degree. It's interesting, when I graduated from a state university, because my parents couldn't afford to send me to a private institution, so I didn't have a lot of choices. Growing up in New York State, there were lots of great public institutions, and so I had lots of great places to go. I had a fantastic undergraduate education, and I was happy at that. You know, when I was getting ready to think about my career after 4 years of undergraduate, I wanted to work as a med tech. And I remember applying to the Centers for Disease Control to see if I can get a position as a med tech, because I liked science, I liked biology. That's what I wanted to do. I couldn't get a job as a med tech, right? And so I started talking to some family friends, and they're like, well, why don't you go to graduate school? And I thought, wow, graduate school, why do I need to keep going to school? In fact, my father couldn't really understand why I was going to go to graduate school. But nonetheless, I went to graduate school, and I went to graduate school in a medical school, right? You know, I didn't get an MD, I got a PhD, not very far from Buffalo in Rochester, New York. So I never went very far from home. But I would say that, you know, my education, both my undergraduate education and my graduate education, really opened me up to just different ways of thinking. And I think because of kind of the foundation I had in high school to kind of just try different things and not be afraid of failing, that really allowed me to kind of do things that I would have never imagined I could do. And then when I got my PhD, I actually got to go to the CDC, because then I learned about a fellowship that I could get from the federal government to actually do a postdoctoral fellowship at the CDC. So it was at that point in my career that I actually left Western New York and went down south to Atlanta, which was, you know, a totally different experience for me culturally than growing up in the Northeast. And you know, I spent time at the CDC. I spent time at Emory. I spent time at Morehouse School of Medicine, which was phenomenal for me. And then I came to Boston. You know, so my journey was a journey in which I tried different things, and I wasn't afraid to try different things. Was I uncomfortable trying different things? Of course, I was uncomfortable trying different things. I always think you should be in a place where you're out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the only way you learn, right? But what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to fail, right? What's the worst thing? So, you know, I had, since I've been in Boston, it's been a phenomenal experience, right? You know, I came to Boston to continue my research, and I did that. But what I learned along the way is that I wanted to have a bigger influence than I was having as a faculty member in a clinical department in a medical school. I wanted to shape things in a bigger way. And so that's why I decided then to become the chair of the immunology department at the medical school. But I also felt after 4 years in that role that I wasn't being utilized to my full potential. Like there was more that I could do. And that's why I took on the role as vice provost for research. And then this role as provost, again, it's just, there is such great potential when you sit in these roles to really make a difference. And
Mhm.
and that's my journey. It was
Sure.
not planned in any way. All I can say is that I've enjoyed every step of the way. I've been in lots of different places and lots of different roles, and I think those all shaped me and allow me to do my current role much more effectively, because I have seen lots of different ways of doing things and thinking. And so anyway, that's kind of a very, we could talk about this for like the next hour.
No, no, that's fine.
You
No,
could
well, we are in some ways. We are in some ways.
Okay,
But I have a
okay,
question
so,
to get to some more nuance in all of this.
okay,
But before I go there to the next question, I actually have a curiosity that I've been wondering personally. And so if you don't mind me to go off this little script a little bit, but
good,
I'm curious. So I worked at Barnard College as a man, right? As a cis
yeah,
man, being in residence with the Barnard women and what that experience was like. For me, as you said, it was beautiful to see young women being leaders and being able to not have to navigate like in direct day to day in terms of what it means to navigate sexism and misogyny and all those things and in real cute ways. But I'm curious for you in terms of like being at an HBCU, right? I know you're at the hospital, but you said you learned a lot and that was good for you. What did you take away from being in that experience? I'm just curious about that. Yeah.
that's a great question. It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard because it didn't feel comfortable. I hadn't been in a situation. I was one of the only few white women at that institution. And people were extremely welcoming.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with the people. It had to do with me saying, wow, I don't fit in here. I don't look like everybody else. So when I was at Morehouse, I was there for 5.5 years, and I said, I'm here for a reason. I know I am really here for a reason to grow as an individual. And I
Mhm.
did. I really grew as an individual because I understood what it felt like to be a minority in an institution. And I trained this was a medical school, so I trained MDs, but I also trained graduate students while I was there.
Mhm.
And when I moved from Morehouse to Boston,
Mhm.
those graduate students came with me. And there were
Yeah.
3 graduate students of color. And they had
Mhm.
a hard time in Boston. They had
Mhm.
a really, really hard time kind of fitting in. And when I got to Boston University, I began to design graduate programs. And we really spent a lot of time designing programs that would support students of color, which we hadn't done before. There was always this big push to diversify our student pool, but not to give them the resources that they needed to succeed. And so I
Mhm.
learned from my Morehouse days, we
Yeah.
had a program where it was a 5-year MD program because many of those students didn't have the same tools that my majority students have when they go to a medical school. So they needed a little extra help. And so we had a
Mhm.
5-year program. And so I learned that it's not just about getting people to where they, the ability to learn, but to support them through that process in what they needed. So that was, it was a really great experience. And I just also want to say that the other important thing about Morehouse is that I
Yeah.
moved from Emory to
Yes.
Morehouse in
Yes.
the same
Right.
city,
Right.
two very
Drastically
different,
different.
drastically different institutions.
Yeah.
I got to
Yeah.
tell you, I liked Morehouse more than I liked Emory. I just have to tell you, because I think as a woman at Emory at the time, it was also really hard to be a woman there in the South. So I
Yeah.
have to just say that as well.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. As you know, I know that in my work, I talk about the
Yeah.
importance of, putting yourself in spaces in which that, yeah, you have to begin to do an analysis for your own identity, right? And especially like when you're like, in a space where you're not the majority, right? And so that's thoughtful. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to move us to talk about your job now as provost, university provost. And you and I have talked about this. I have talked about this to every provost I've worked with. People usually don't understand what a provost is, right? And so I would like to peel back the curtain a little bit, and if you could take us on a journey of what does it mean to be a provost broadly, maybe a provost here at Tufts, and if there is a standard common day, right? And every day, what does that look like for you in your work or how you engage in your work? And so just tell us a little bit about what it means to be a provost in a university context. Yeah.
So, you know, I never knew what a provost did. Let me just tell you that. And most people don't know what a provost does, right? So my job is to really oversee the academic mission of the university.
Right.
And Tufts University is a very decentralized university.
Mhm.
And what that means is that, you know, each school really has its own structure, its own governance structure, its own dean, its own executive associate dean, and each dean manages his or her school. What
Mhm.
my job is to do is to support those deans to try to understand what they need to be successful for their school and what I can do to facilitate collaborations between the schools, one, to maximize kind of the interdisciplinary work that we do, but importantly, to be their cheerleader
Mhm.
when it comes to getting things done at the institutional level. And so, you know, we have a whole administrative side of the house, right? And the role of the administrative side of the house is to support the academic mission of the university. And so my job is to be those cheerleaders for the deans to make
Mhm.
sure that they can be successful. And if
Mhm.
they run into barriers, it's my job to take down those barriers and make sure that they can be successful. Part of that also is when I think they need my advice on doing something, they often come to me for advice. We talk a lot about what they're doing. Remember, in a university, the organizational dynamics are pretty complex, right? So each dean oversees, you know, academic deans, other deans in their schools. They oversee the chairs, they oversee the students, they oversee the programming, they interface with alumni, they have to deal with budgets. There's a lot of complexity even within the schools. My job is to help them with managing that complexity within their schools, as well as being able to manage that complexity across schools. Sometimes, you know, two of the deans are trying to work together and they're at an impasse. My job is to sit with them and try to work things out. So
Mhm.
really what I like about my job is that I get to see the complete picture of the academic kind of landscape of the university. And I also get to see what's possible. Often the deans are very focused on their own schools, as they should be. But what I really enjoy doing is finding kind of the excellence in the various pockets of schools and thinking of how we can work together. Because one of the things which I think has really defined my career and is something that I really love doing is bringing people together, bringing teams together to work collaboratively, to really understand each other, understand strengths, weaknesses, and how we could all work together as a community. So that's what I really love about my job, is that I get to see all of it, and really to foster kind of community building within the schools, but then across the university, within faculty, within students, within staff. So it's actually quite interesting to be at this level and see
Sure.
it all. So
Yeah.
because of that, Monroe,
Yep.
I do
Yes.
a lot of different things during the day, right?
Yep. Yep.
I do
Yep.
I do a lot of different things through the day. So I have to turn
Yes.
my brain from one area to another, like really quickly, right? And
Yep.
really focus on, so I meet with students, I listen to students often, just as the president does. You know, Sunil and I meet regularly with the TCU Senate, that's the undergraduate Senate. We meet with graduate student groups. You know, you and I also meet with various affinity groups, you know, just to hear their perspectives. I
Mhm.
meet with faculty. We have a university-wide faculty senate. And one of my goals over the last several years is to really partner more with them so that we can work together on the governance of the university. People always forget that I am a faculty member. And, you know, one of the reasons I came into this role is to support faculty and to make sure they get the things they need to be able to succeed, to do their jobs.
So do some of your own research too, right? And so
I,
I'm curious, how do
yes.
you balance doing all of what you just said along with still maintaining your own research lab? So how do you make that fit? Because I think that's important for like for you to still hold the space of being a peer in some
Yeah.
ways too. like, which is an interesting dynamic, being a peer still with researchers and faculty, whilst also still though, kind of like, being that person that helps coordinate the possibility of the research and teaching. So how do you hold both of those, that space simultaneously, out of curiosity?
You know, I think it's really hard to be an administrator if you're not in the weeds on the things that you're doing. So for a short period of my week, I am in the weeds on research in my research lab. I have I have a lab. I still have actually 2 graduate students in the medical school who will be finishing very, very soon. I still write research grants. I write papers, maybe not as frequently as I should, but I think it's really important to continue to stay grounded and what excites you, right? And that's the science that I do. That's the scholarship that I do. My training of graduate students. I mean, for me not to be able to interact, intimately with students and understand what's on their minds, have students' needs changed over the years? Yeah, they have. How else would I know that if I don't continue to meet with students, right? And actually
Right.
train and mentor them directly. How can I stay current in research if I'm not actually writing research proposals, going to seminars, going to conferences, organizing conferences? I wish I could do more of it. There's no question of it. I wish I could do more of it. But I think it's critical for me in my role to be able to have at least a glimpse of what it's like to continue to be a faculty member. Yes, it's different. I'm the provost, and also I have a faculty appointment in the medical school. Yeah, there's no question about it. It's different than just being a faculty member. But I go to faculty meetings when I can. I'm on research training grants. I'm on student thesis committee. So I do try to keep current in that space, because that's critical. Is for me to be able to do my jobs, to really understand what's going on. I'm trying to promote education and research, and so I really need to understand where we are in this moment in time. So
Oh,
it's hard. I have a great research lab. I have several great colleagues that I work with collaboratively here in Boston as well as outside of Boston. I have a former graduate student who graduated from Boston University, who now has his own research lab, and he's in Seattle. He and I still collaborate. So that's part of my building teams and doing things together as a team, right?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, because I'm always curious about leaders and their learning edge. So I would love to hear from you. When is an aha moment you've had, either in your role currently as provost? Yeah, let's go there. In your role currently as provost over this last couple of years, what's an aha moment? You're like, a light bulb just went off for me in terms of how I might want to do work differently, or something I didn't expect to come forward, or to fruition in the work, or something you stumbled, and you said before, this thing about recovery. I think it's very important for us to have this space as leaders to explore and stretch ourselves, to maybe fail, but to also have the space of recovery. So I'm curious, aha moment, a time in which that you've had a stumble along the way, where you've learned something as an educator, as a researcher, as a leader. So share that more with us a little bit, maybe your thoughts about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to make sure you have time for reflection.
Mm.
And I think the aha moment for me, I wouldn't say it's one moment. I would say it's multiple moments. It's when I take the time to really listen
Mm.
to someone's point of view. And often we are in meetings and someone will say something and it kind of just goes right over my head, and I miss it, and I don't really take the time to understand where that person or group of people are coming from. I would say over the last year, a lot of that has come in talking to students and
Mhm.
students, various affinity group students. I would say it's also come from faculty, listening to where faculty are coming from. So the aha moment is more about not walking into a conversation with the preconceived idea
Yeah.
of what you think about a topic, but really stepping back and listening. And
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily happen in just one conversation. So I think it's really being able to understand a situation and say, boy, I was on the wrong track on that.
Mm.
I wasn't really thinking of this with an open mind, or I wasn't thinking clearly. I was so busy and narrowly focused on what I was doing that I haven't given this person or these people the opportunity to really share what they're thinking with me and to kind of, I don't want to say change, or I would just say, give me a really understand a different perspective. So to me, that's the most important thing. The thing about that, though, is though it takes time.
It's time.
It takes time.
Slow down. We have to slow down.
We have to slow down. That's what I can say. We have to slow down.
Yeah.
Often we're so action oriented
Mm.
that we have to get these things done, but then often we need to pause and we want to say, well, what's the outcome? What am I really looking to do here? Why am I so action oriented? And I think that's really important. I think I will continue to do it. I would think all good leaders will continue to have to really step back and say, from that action, and say, what's the end point here? What am I trying to achieve? So I think that's more of it than just a one aha moment, because I think it happens a lot. It happens frequently.
So to build on this,
Yeah.
you said this earlier too, and so I actually want to give you an opportunity to maybe even share more about this. You said you enjoy the people. And I know that that's something that is very important to you, right, in terms of your leadership. And so my question is what brings you joy in helping to develop other leaders? What gives you joy in that work? Like what, because I know that's something that is important in your work as well. And so tell me about that. Like give us a sense of what the
You know,
why of
it's
that, why.
well, it's really interesting when people come to talk to me, faculty in particular, come to talk to me about some of the issues they're having. And I think to be able to pull back and really understand what's best for that person and to do it objectively, I would say, there's a big difference between mentoring and sponsoring someone.
Sure.
So what I would say is what I really enjoy is sponsoring someone, because once you understand that person and their strengths and their limitations, you can help them on their journey, right? So for me, the joy comes from really helping to not just mentor, but to nurture and sponsor someone along their life journey, right? And what they do it on their own. It's not me. It's really being able to get them to realize how they're going to go about doing this and being successful. It's not me telling them how they're going to be successful, right? It's getting them to realize how they're going to be successful, and for them to get the confidence and to say, well, maybe I should try that, or maybe I should try this. So what brings me joy is having people figuring it out on their own. It's not telling people what to do, it's getting them to figure it out on their own. That's, I think, what brings me joy. And to see the change, I've seen lots of people move along, do things that they really enjoy and get to a place where they're really happy. Some people get stuck. It's hard. Higher education is hard. It can be demanding, and people get stuck, but to watch people get unstuck, but they do it on their own. And so I'm just there to facilitate and help them along their way, and to sponsor them when I need to sponsor them. But I wouldn't say it's mentoring. I think it's helping facilitate and sponsor them more than it is mentoring.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, I think that's often what people are looking for and seeking when they come for advice, right? Is helping them to realize that those skills and those talents and the ideas and the solutions are already within them. It's just about how do we bring that out of them, right? And help them to flourish through that. And so I want to move us to a couple of questions we've received from our audience in advance, right? And so one of the questions was about, our campus climate. Right. And this came up as well in my conversation with Sunil, President Kumar, the week before last. And so I know that you played a significant role in navigating COVID, as in your role as Vice Provost for Research, and then the transition you made into the Provostio role. And so you've also held great responsibility for how we've responded over this last year plus. around the war in the Middle East, right? How that has impacted our campus climate and community, right? Which we know, especially last academic year, it has significant impacts on how our community engaged with each other, the rise in terms of like bias and some forms of hate and political polarization from, and things like anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and things that were probably already existing in our community, but bringing it more forward, right, in so many different kinds of ways. And so, as you've had to navigate that in your provost role in helping to bring and facilitate community here at the university, what did you learn from that experience? Or what, and how, in what ways did you feel were ways in which that we brought the community together to try to bridge across difference and to try to help people to better understand the perspectives around others, right? And so tell us a little bit about your learning or what you've taken away from that, and maybe some of the things that we did that will be helpful for our alumni community, especially and our parents, to know how we've responded. Yeah, at the university.
Thanks, Monroe. So I want to touch briefly on COVID because those are two different crises, very
Sure,
different, but
absolutely.
I was involved in both of them, and I think I learned a lot from both of them.
Sure.
So the COVID experience was quite interesting, and I'll tell you why, because during COVID, I was in the vice provost for research role.
Mhm.
And as you know, the COVID-19 virus it's an infectious disease, very contagious virus. I study infectious disease, bacteria, not viruses, but that is within my realm of research. And at the time, in the summer of 2020, we really wanted to get our students back to campus. That was critical. As you know, all of our students had to leave in the middle of March of 2020. And we spent between March 15th of 2020 throughout the spring and summer trying to understand how we could get our students back to campus. That was critical. And one of the things that I did, working really closely with the president at the time, was to develop a testing methodology. It was called pool testing, so that we could pool multiple students at the same time, which was much more cost effective. So what I did basically on campus was to do a clinical study very quickly to see if this pool testing worked. We validated that the pool testing worked, and then we were able to use it while we did testing 3 times a week for our students on campus. That allowed our students to come back and actually have a year here, a full year on campus. So, it was a little different. They wore masks and there was social distancing, but it allowed us to get our students back to campus. And so I was able to use my scientific knowledge together with the fact that I was the vice provost for research to be able to get this testing off the ground. And then the other thing we were able to do is we were able to go into the Somerville and Medford school system and use that pool testing to be able to give back to the community and make sure that those students, those K to 12 students can actually also get back to the classroom. So that was an opportunity for the university to come together to do what it does best, obviously education and research, to get our students back, but also to give back to the community. So that was an example of a crisis situation in which we were able to figure out how to deal with it on our own campus and get our students back, but also how to give back to the community. The geopolitical conflict in the Middle East that we have been dealing with for more than a year now was different, but it was a crisis.
Right.
It was a crisis across the globe, but in particular, it was a crisis for so many of our Tufts community members. And so how did we navigate that? I think what we did early on was to understand that this was a crisis and that many of our community members needed acute support. Before we could even begin to have a dialogue about what was going on or put together some educational programming, we needed to make sure that our students, our faculty, and our staff had the mental health support that they needed. And so we basically, for several months, we brought in an outside consultant to help us get mental health support, acute support, crisis support for our faculty, staff, and students. And that was really, really early on. Then we realized that it was a time for people to begin to have dialogue and to have conversations about what was going on with each other. And we did that. We did it very carefully. We did it at the school level. Some of those dialogue series were just faculty, some were faculty and students, some were just students, and some also had staff in there. And I think we learned that we had to approach this very carefully. It was a very delicate situation, and we needed people to tell us how we could support them, right? I mean,
Well, we had to meet people where they were, right? We
right,
had to meet people where they were, recognizing some of our faculty were not ready to be in
right.
public space, who are experts in some of this, but they were concerned about like, how they would experience it, or they weren't emotionally ready to be in those conversations yet, right? And so, yeah, we had to meet people where they are, as you said.
Right. I mean, the question you asked about, with my response being more action oriented, and we sometimes don't understand the endpoint. I think there was this tendency to be action oriented and to do something, but we really needed to step back and understand what is it that we could do to be helpful, right? We needed a list of people. I mean, I can keep going on and on, but Monroe, obviously you and I worked together on this.
No,
This was what we saw initially.
right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's always to your point. It's like we had to understand, we had to lean into who our community was and we are. Like, and what we know is that our community generally there are a few things. One, people are really passionate about things they get passionate about here, right? We have a very socially, politically connected, especially student body, but many of our faculty as well. And we have a staff community who really cares about the humanness of people, right? And so we had to navigate, how do we bridge based on who our community is, right? And meeting them where they are, right? And reminding our community at times too of the values, right? Even as we may disagree, even as we may have those tension points, right? And I will say that while there certainly was a lot to learn, and we certainly had our moments institutionally, but we can say that many other institutions had it much worse. And I think a lot of it is because of, again, there's still a certain kind of value orientation here at Tufts that has helped us in some ways in terms of managing the conflicts. It doesn't mean that people are not still happy. We're not happy. We understand that and continue not to be perfectly happy. And we're still in that listening phase. We still have not let go of the work. We're still doing education. And now we're in the educational framework of it, right? Equipping our community with better skills and awareness and knowledge. But we have to do these things at meet and bring the community along. And they had to bring us along.
Right. 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 Exactly. Exactly. And understanding what the needs are, right, and bring us along. We need to be educated along the way. I think one of the things that we did and is really coordinating that response. And again, me telling you about where I sit, I kind of see what goes on across the institution. So it was we in the provost office were able to coordinate that response among the schools, among faculty, students, and staff working with HR. So we were able to coordinate the response. I think that's one of the other issues. It was the same thing with COVID, because we're so decentralized. People didn't know what other schools or other communities within a school, were doing. And so our job was to coordinate that response. And I think the other really important thing that we did was to coordinate it across the Boston higher education schools, right? We worked, with we worked with all the provosts across the 9 New England schools to come up with a coordinated educational programming because, we had the resources. We did the same thing during COVID, right? So I think it's working together within our community at Tufts, as well as kind of our immediate community, right, in the Boston area. There's a lot of expertise. So I think this general theme of how do we deal with crises is we have to understand first what's going on, but there are a lot of resources within our community here at Tufts and in our larger community. And I would say that would include alumni too, right?
Oh, absolutely, without
Yeah.
question. I mean, we definitely sought the consult
Yeah.
of some members of our alumni community as well, without question. And thank you to those who stepped forward to partner with us to find solutions. That was incredibly helpful. And so speaking out to our alumni community right now. And I would say the last thing related to this, and I'm going to get to a couple of other questions, is that, it also has now helped us to think about what do we now need to do to continue the work, right? And so we have invested many more, not just financial resources, I mean, intellectual resources, people resources, time as a resource around listening, around dialogue, and around restorative practices, so that we continue to embed this into the framework and the fabric of who we are as an institution, which I think helps us to continue to do the healing journey that we're on, right? And also how we think about all of these things connected from we still are dealing with racism in the United States and at universities. We're still dealing with issues around trans issues and gender dynamics. So how do we hold all of these in the context of multiple ways in which our communities experience bias and trauma and misunderstandings? And so we're still on the journey and leaning into who we are as an academic institution that's based on the values of people, as you say. Yes.
And when I started this conversation, I told you about my journey at Morehouse. So how much has really changed since that? Since that was some time ago. This is a journey. This is a real journey, I have to say.
Yeah. So we had another question about, and you actually kind of get to this a little bit earlier around what is the role of the university in in greater society? What is our role in terms of how do we respond? How are we thinking about beyond the borders of the institution, when we think about lifelong learning for our faculty and our alum and in the workforce and workforce development? So as you're thinking about emerging trends that are going to impact higher education or the world, as a whole, what keeps you up at night about this? What are your thoughts about what higher education should be focusing on, as we go into, let's say, maybe even the next decade or so? What are your thoughts about that, Caroline?
So, one of the biggest issues I think for me is making sure that we do our job to educate students when they're on our campus, and that it's affordable.
Mm.
And that we make college accessible for all. I mean, again, coming from my background, I understand firsthand the value of a college education and what it meant, what education in general meant for me, right? And I think this is a national problem. It's a problem we're seeing at Tufts, but we really need to think more creatively about how we make our education here at Tufts accessible to all. That could be, pipeline programming, that could be broadening our definition of what it means to be a student and workforce development. It could be working together with community colleges. I think we have to think outside the box of what does it mean to be a student. Is it just a student who applies, to 20 colleges and gets in, or do we have to be much more proactive in making sure that we go outside of our community and actually do outreach to make sure we get the students here on Tufts and give them the opportunity? So for me, that's the biggest challenge for us, is how do we make this affordable, and what's that return on investment once you get here? How do we support you so that you can be successful once you leave? And what I mean by support, it's not just career development, it's complete wraparound services, right? From day one when you come, it's understanding diversity and going into dialogue and understanding the world outside of, the Medford Somerville campus. So to me, we really have a big responsibility when we bring students to our campus, and making sure we bring as diverse a student body as we can and make what we do here accessible to as many students as we possibly can. It's only going to make for a better educational setting for all of our students, right?
All of us. And it makes it for a better experience for the faculty in the classroom in terms of their teaching and how students learn. When it's a more diverse environment, or we have more access for people coming from all walks of experiences in life, from other countries, from other places, like in the United States, different class backgrounds, racial backgrounds, etc. We know that just makes for a better learning experience for all. A better teaching experience, I hope, for most faculty too.
Yeah,
Right?
yes,
Of
yes,
the,
for
like
faculty. Well,
yes, yes, yes. When
yeah,
you think about
yeah.
pluralism and like the diversity of thought and perspective, not divorced from who we are, right? And so, so it informs and shapes. I want to take this question up that came up from some of our faculty that are here. And we received quite a volume of these questions, to be really candid, around affordability and cost of living for our faculty, for our lecturers, for people who are teaching in our classrooms, et cetera. And, you know, so I would love to hear some of your insights on how do we decide these things, like institutionally, like, and what are just your reflections? Like, because I see this as not only an issue here at Tufts, you know, having worked at a number of institutions just like you, right, and been in a leadership role, like in my last institution for quite some time, that, you know, these things have layers, they're layered, right? And not to make an excuse for anything, but also this is a national issue we need to continue to think about in terms of pay in higher education, especially for those teaching in the classroom. So I want to hear some of your thoughts about that, since this is a question that kept coming up.
Yeah, this is a priority for me, is looking at faculty salaries. It's a priority look at salaries across all of our schools. And actually, it's a project that we're working on right now. We're doing a market compensation review. One of the things we have been trying to do is to look at it across the university, but because we have such diversity of schools and there's discipline-specific benchmarks, what we have been doing now is working with each of the deans to make sure that we have comparable schools. So for example, the professional schools are very different than our undergraduate schools and who their benchmarks are. So what we've been doing is we've been working with an outside consultant, and we've come up with a peer list of institutions that look like us, and that there are data on faculty salary. That's pretty hard to do, let me just tell you, because most universities don't provide salary data for faculty to an organization that we call Coupa. So we're trying to get data on faculty salaries at various institutions, and then begin to go through school by school, discipline by discipline, to look at how our faculty are paid. That's the first part of it. The second part of it is then to sit with the deans and to come up with a plan on how we look at all their faculty salaries and make adjustments when we need to. It's complicated. And the only reason I say that is because of the diversity of schools. Now, some schools already have really robust programs within the schools on how they set salaries, and others do not. So what we're trying to do is to come up with some guidelines so that we look at faculty salaries using some standard guidelines across the university, and then with specificity at the school and discipline level. We're just in the midst of doing this. It is a priority, but then it's really going to come upon the deans and I to work closely to make sure that they can look carefully at their faculty salaries once we have the data, to make sure they're competitive. So that's the first thing. The other thing that we've been working on for the last 9 months or so, that we just announced about a month or so ago, is a faculty housing assistance program. We have some faculty rental property that we have made available. It's called Walnut Hill to faculty. It's not a lot, but it allows us to get some faculty into what we're calling subsidized faculty housing. But then we have this faculty housing program, second mortgage program, where we're assisting faculty in getting second mortgages. It's not applicable to all faculty at this point. It's a pilot program. We're starting it off, but we understand we have to start some way. And I would say the third area is just general other resources to help faculty in financial going through their kind of financial planning and things like that. Do we need to do more? Yes. Are other institutions doing more? Yes. We just don't have the resources of some of these other institutions to be able to do more, but we are trying as hard as we can to listen to what faculty need and try to begin to address it.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you taking that question straight on. Thank you for that, Caroline. I want to go back to a question about you as a leader, and then I want to get to a question about our alumni, which someone asked a question in the chat. I see that question, which we were already planning to ask a related question, but I didn't get a chance to ask you earlier. How do you replenish as a leader? what do you do to take care and also to take care of community, right? I like a friend, her name is Melissa Harris Perry, and she talks about like moving from just self-care to posse care, to your like, to your tribe. How do you take care of your people, right? And so both yourself and then as how you think about community care. Yeah.
So how I take care of myself is I really make sure I have time for reflection and downtime.
Mhm.
I go to the gym every morning just because, not because I want to be physically fit, but just it allows me to just let my brain go.
Mm.
I spend morning time reflecting in that way. And at the end of the day, I will do something totally off the wall that has nothing to do with work. So that allows me to process and to
Mhm.
reflect.
Yeah.
On the weekends, I do a lot of reflection. In addition, I'm very programmed and when I will do work and when I will shut work off.
Yes.
And I try really hard with my team to say, if we can get something done between Monday and Friday, we should. Emergencies will always come up, but there will
Sure.
always be things. But there's no reason to have to go on a call on Sunday afternoon if we don't have to. So I really try to be organized. There will all and make sure that my private time is just as important as my time at work. How do I take care of others? Well, that by definition, that's what I am. I'm a caretaker, right? I was brought up in a very traditional Italian family. I am a caretaker. I take care of my kids, and I have a new grandson, and I take care of him when I can see him. I take care of my friends.
Mhm.
So taking care of my community is really important, and my team. I try to be perceptive when something's up with them. I can usually tell when something's up, and so as Monroe knows.
Yes.
I try to sometimes step away from work and just kind of listen to what they're saying and say, something doesn't sound right here.
Mhm.
And try to maybe probe a little bit and make sure that they have the time they need to just step away. So I
Mhm.
try to be perceptive to others' needs. Sometimes I'm not always good at it, and I have a great second in command who
Yes.
reminds me of that,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
and reminds me
Quite
of
good at her job. She's
yeah,
quite good
yeah,
at her
yeah. It
job.
reminds
Yeah.
me of those soft skills that are
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's critical is really to make sure that people feel that they have the space. If they need to step away, that they can comfortably say that to you and step away.
Thank you. So the last question, and it's the same last question that I asked Sunil as well. And it's a question that came up in the chat. How can our alumni engage more with our work, or what are ways in which we can partner together and collaborate more with our alumni community? And so if you have thoughts about that, we would love to hear your reflections, which I know you do have thoughts on it.
I know I do, and I'm so thrilled that we're doing this. Our alumni are a treasure for us, right? They're ambassadors for the institution. And they all come from different parts of the globe and different walks of life, and they have different perspectives. So you heard me talk a lot about different perspectives. So I would really look to the alumni to help us, solve some of these problems that we've talked about. Their expertise is so critical to help us, these conversations. And so I think these series, and so that our alumni understand kind of what's on our mind, where can you be helpful? We have a board of advisors that are all of our alums that sit at the individual school, and I oversee those board of advisors, and I constantly hear from them, how can we be more engaged, right? And I think there's a real want. So I think that we can work together with Sean's office and trying to come up with areas that we
Mhm.
need help on at the institutional level that alumni can actually be involved in and volunteer. So there may be, 5 areas that we feel we need help in it. One of
Yeah.
it, I know a lot of the alumni do a lot of work on undergraduate recruitment, but we
Mhm.
would love to also work with alumni on, half of our student body are graduate or professional students, right? So we would love to work with alumni wherever they are to get the word out about what Tufts has to offer here. So not just our undergraduate, but I think more of our graduate programs and professional programs. The other area is partnerships. We're really looking for business partnerships. So many of our alumni, have unbelievable positions and could really be helpful to us. So your expertise is critical for us. And we recognize that. And I think it's just how do we organize that and how do we match make what your expertise is with what we need. But critical, really, really critical to, I think, the health of Tufts moving forward.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I will say that we're actively working and partnering with our alumni council on the developing pathways for greater engagement with our alumni to help us achieve some of our priorities. And so if the alumni community is also looking for a structured way to help and support, that's a group that I know is always looking for more volunteers and more engagement, but we're literally in the throes of conversations with them, especially in how they can help us advance inclusive excellence here at the university and achieve our educational mission as well through the work that our Vice Provost for Education is doing too. And so I want to say thank you for this conversation, Caroline. It's gone by so quickly. I can't believe we're already at the hour. It has been lovely I learned a lot. Like I got to ask you a question about working with Morehouse as well that I have been meaning to ask you, just have never had taken the time because we've had many other conversations in our time together working with each other. And just thank you for the impact that you're making as our provost and senior vice president here at the university and your commitment and care for people. And so thank you for being the second in this series. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate you. And we would also like to just remind you that this is the second of a third part of our series, which will be in January in conversation with JT Duck, our Dean for Admissions. I believe the date is January 4th, but you will get more information about that. Thank you for joining us today and wishing everyone a wonderful end of the 2024 and a very happy 2025. And so thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Caroline.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
for your support and work. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.